Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Safer Bay Project Notice of Preparation webinar. This meeting will be interpreted into Spanish. Interpretation is being provided by Noemi Gonzalez Rocha and Kayla Lugo Reñal.
Thank you, Margaret. Miko, would you mind turning interpretation? Oh, there it is. Thank you so much.
Yes, it should be on now. Thank you.
If we could advance to the next slide. Thank you. This evening, we will use Zoom's nearly simultaneous interpretation feature. To ensure that we all get the most out of this webinar, there are a few important things to keep in mind. Presenters, please speak at a moderate pace and take frequent pauses. Attendees, please select your preferred language for interpretation. On your computer, move your mouse to make sure the options at the bar at the bottom of your screen appear. You will see a small globe or atlas symbol. Click on that. For English speakers, you will select English.
Seleccionarán inglés. Sorry, Margaret, would you give me a brief pause to repeat what you just said? Thank you. Estaremos interpretando esta reunión al español. Todavía no se ha activado interpretación, pero cuando lo hagamos, las personas que se han conectado en computadora buscarán un globito en la parte de abajo de su computadora y seleccionarán español. Go ahead, Margaret. Thank you.
For English speakers, please select English. Once you've selected your language preference, if there's an option to do so, select Done. If you're using a smartphone, a tablet, or an iPad, look for the interpretation function in the 3 dots menu.
Y seleccionen el español en el globito. Si se conectaron en teléfono o tableta, busquen la opción de interpretación de idiomas bajo el menú de 3 puntitos o más. Luego seleccionen español y después de seleccionar español, opriman listo o done. And Miko, could you turn interpretation on now? Miko, si puede.
Okay, interpretation has been turned on. Thank you.
We will pause here for a moment while everyone is selecting their preferred language. Kevin, next slide, please. Uh-oh.
Yeah, forgive me just a second. We're having a little trouble running this. I am going to reopen and rerun it from here.
Great. The previous slide, please. There we go. Thank you. All right. Welcome to the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority Notice of Preparation public meeting. My name is Margaret Bruce. I'm the Executive Director for the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority. I'll be your Master of Ceremonies this evening. This meeting is being recorded. We will post the recording on the SFCJPA website. We will be using the Q&A function this evening. We welcome your comments and questions. Please type them into the Q&A function at any time during the presentation. We will address comments and questions at the end of the presentation. We will be taking 3 brief opinion polls during the webinar. Next slide, please. In keeping with honoring our First Americans, the Safer Bay project sits on the traditional territory and unceded homeland of more than 9 tribes of First Peoples, the Ohlone, who were the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the First Peoples have acted as caretakers of this place for millennia. We recognize the benefit of living and working in their traditional homeland. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment, our commitment, for a process that recognizes the sovereign rights of First Peoples. So this is a brief organization of our presentation that you can expect this evening. After our welcome, we will have a review of our process, a review of the project, a description of additional public outreach, and then we'll turn it to you, our attendees, for your comments and questions. Next slide, please. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome the Vice Chair of our Board of Directors, Council Member from Menlo Park, and District 2 Representative from Menlo Park, Mr. Drew Combs.
Thank you, Executive Director Bruce. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. And starting my remarks, I do want to acknowledge some of the events and actions of the last meeting. And I want to acknowledge them, but not dwell on them. And I want to acknowledge them to again express my apology to the public on behalf of the entire JPA board that had to endure those actions. I certainly don't want to dwell on them because there is a lot of work that has gone into getting us this far. And this is a really, really, really important project. There can be no more important project than a project that attempts to address and deal with what is the challenge of our age. And that is the impacts of climate change. And of course, a central part of that impact is sea level rise. And this project attempts to protect and secure critical and key portions of our community and infrastructure from sea level rise. And for that reason, I want to again emphasize that this is a really important project that will have benefits for us, but benefits for generations to come. We aim to protect critical habitats that also help protect the shoreline, protect water, energy and transportation infrastructure, and protect the homes and businesses at risk in Menlo Park and east of Palo Alto. Of course, this is just the beginning of what will be a long process, and we want you to be involved in the process at every step of the way. We actually need you to be involved at every step of the way. So we look to working with you and the experts as we deal with the technical and environmental challenges and details that are going to be inherent to this incredibly complex project. With that, I'll close by again expressing your appreciation for attending this event, for sticking with us, and again want to also express my appreciation for the JPA staff, which over the past couple of weeks have had to deal with things that I don't think ever thought that they would have to deal with as the staff of a relatively small government agency, but they have certainly more than lived up to the challenge of the past few days. So with that, again, thank you, and again, this is just the beginning.
Thank you so much, Board Member and Council Member Drew. I appreciate that very much. Now, what we're going to launch into at the moment is our first poll. This is a quick icebreaker poll, and we'd love you to share what your opinion is, what you like most about living near the bay. We'll have this poll open for, let's give it about 20 more, maybe 30 more seconds, and let people express their opinion. We'll share the outcome in just a moment. Looks like we are just about done. A couple more votes coming in. Wow, it looks like there are an awful lot of folks who think the view of the bay is fabulous. Next up, they like the trails. Birds and wildlife and water come in with some respectable showings, but the overwhelming majority say they love the view. I'm going to close the poll now, and we're going to move on. So now we'll go into our presentations and about the process first, and then the project. Speaking first will be Jill Hamilton, who is the Principal Associate from Environmental Science Associates. She'll be speaking on the process of the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. After Jill, we will hear from Tess Byler, Senior Project Manager at the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority, who is leading the project work. We will also hear from Violet Sina, Executive Director of Climate Resilient Communities, and Victoria Avila, Program Director at Nusta Casa, who will discuss community engagement and coordination. Now, please welcome Jill Hamilton.
Thank you, Margaret. So the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, is California's primary environmental law. CEQA requires agencies like the Joint Powers Authority to consider impacts on the environment before approving a project. CEQA also provides ways for the community to be involved in project planning. The Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, is the main document through which the lead agency implements CEQA. Next slide. Next slide.
I apologize, Jill. If we stay on one slide for more than a couple minutes, it freezes. So what I'm going to do is restart it from that slide. And every now and again, you folks are going to see me toggle. And all I'm going to do is move up one slide and back to the slide we're on real quick, just to keep it fresh.
Thanks, Kevin.
Sure. So I apologize if it moves occasionally. That's just me clearing out the PowerPoint.
Great. So this slide depicts the environmental review process, which essentially has 3 phases: scoping, preparing the draft EIR, and preparing the final EIR. And each phase has opportunities for public input. We're in the scoping phase, which is the very beginning of the CEQA process. And it's really about hearing from you. What are the environmental issues you want to see addressed in the EIR? Do you have any particular concerns about how the project might affect you, your neighborhood, or the environment around you? You can find the notice of preparation on the JPA's website if you want more information on the project to help you prepare your comments. And you can submit comments until June 15th. After that, the JPA will confirm the issues to be investigated in the EIR and move forward with field work for design. Once there's enough design information available, we'll prepare the draft EIR's project description and post that document for public review for 30 days. The JPA will also publish a scoping report summarizing the comments received during the scoping process and indicating how those comments are being addressed in the draft EIR. Then we'll conduct the environmental investigations, circulate the draft EIR for public review, and hold public meetings to explain the EIR's findings. That will start the last phase, preparing written responses to comments received on the draft EIR, making revisions, and finalizing the EIR. At that point, the JPA can then certify the EIR and consider project approval. Next slide. The Safer Bay project itself will be implemented in phases and designed for some parts of the project referred to as reaches and depicted on this slide by the different colors will proceed faster than others. The EIR will reflect that. While the EIR will evaluate the whole project comprehensively at what is called a program level of detail, where we have more information on design and construction, the analyses will be more detailed. We refer to that as a project level of detail. For example, we will have detailed information on daily construction vehicle trips for 2 of the reaches, and we'll be able to quantify air pollutant emissions for those vehicle trips. For other reaches, we'll make assumptions, but it won't be as accurate. On this map, the reaches shown with solid lines are the ones that will be evaluated at a project level, and those with dashed lines will be evaluated more generally. Next slide. This slide simply indicates the contents of the EIR, which will be several hundred pages long, but it will have a summary, the project description, a description of the environmental setting, the environmental impacts that the project may cause, and ways to reduce those impacts either through measures to mitigate those effects or lessen them, or alternatives to implement the project in a different way to avoid the impacts. Next slide. There we go. Oops. So again, the primary purpose of the EIR is to investigate adverse effects on the environment, and all of the topics shown on this slide will be evaluated. With respect to climate change, the Safer Bay project is proposed in part to address the consequences of climate change, namely sea level rise and the flooding associated with sea level rise. If you have any particular questions or concerns regarding any of these issues to be investigated in the EIR, please let us know. Next slide.
I'm sorry, Jill, I'm going to run it from the edit platform. It seems to work better when we're this clocked, okay?
Okay,
Just
so
go right ahead.
So you can scoot down to the slide that talks about environmental justice. So in parallel with preparation of the environmental impact report, the JPA will be investigating environmental justice, which essentially involves answering the question, would implementation of the project disproportionately affect disadvantaged communities? So I'd like to turn it over to Tess to talk through the project description.
Thank you, Jill. And thank you all who are listening now and those who will be viewing the recording after it's posted on our website. We really do want to hear from you. For this overview, I will be talking about 5 main things. What is the need for the project? What are the goals? What level of protection are we planning for? What are some of the constraints that will define what gets designed? And finally, What are we thinking about right now as concepts? The need for the project can be seen in this picture. And Kevin, you can move it to the next slide. This is the FEMA flood map showing the 1% or the 100-year flood in lighter blue, and then the 500-year flood area in light brown. Property owners in the 100-year flood zone with mortgages need to comply with insurance requirements and other restrictions on their property. You can also see on this map that there are a lot of levees in place, but they are not certified by FEMA. The project will construct flood protection features that can be certified. We've lost about 85% of the historical marshes. And when I mean lost, I mean that starting in the late 1800s, marsh areas here were filled and used for farming and agriculture and later industry and critical infrastructure. Today, marshes are now recognized for their ability to absorb storm surges, and healthy functioning marsh can actually decrease the required heights of levees. Our waterways are where people want to live, not just here, but all along the United States, and everyone is recognizing the flood protection value of marshes. Next slide. So what are the overarching goals of this project? We have three: nature-based flood protection, protect properties and critical infrastructure, and while doing so, increase the recreational opportunities and connections with the shore. So Kevin, you can, yeah, there we go. Next slide. So overlaying our current tidal flood is, of course, it's not only going to address the current tidal flooding, but also projected sea level rise. The top map shows the current conditions, and the bottom map projects how floodwater will increase under a 100 centimeter or about 3.5 feet of sea level rise. This is considered a medium or a moderate level scenario. Next slide. So there have been several more studies in our area that have validated the approach taken in our 2016 feasibility study, and we're also incorporating the good ideas from each of these. This approach will lead to the best science and optimal approach to meet the project goals of natural flood protection, protect properties and critical infrastructure, and increased recreational opportunities. Next slide. So what are the engineering criteria that we're looking at to meet those overall project goals? We are incorporating the Ocean Protection Council's 2020 recommendation for 3.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050 with a 1% or a 100-year tide. In addition, we have engineering considerations so that the flood protection features can be certified by FEMA. Next slide.
Tess, I'd like to remind everybody that we are showing the slides in edit view because it was giving us technical difficulty in presentation view. We had a question in the Q&A about that.
Okay, and the other thing I'll mention as you're moving it forward, that area in red, I got all these views from a sea level rise mapper cited in this, and that is just emergent groundwater, which is another one of the considerations we're looking at. Next slide. So now let's take a look at the project level area in East Palo Alto. This alignment from the 2016 feasibility study was used to create a preliminary list of properties presented in Attachment A of the NOP that potentially may be affected. This list does not mean that the project will seek to acquire or be constructed on the listed parcels. The search included the 2016 alignment plus a 100-foot buffer on either side as a safety factor. In fact, we do not plan to acquire any properties as part of the Safer Bay project, but we will need easements for the project, including short-term for construction as well as long-term operations and maintenance. Next slide. This shows the project level components in Menlo Park. We're working closely with the landowner, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the Salt Pond Restoration Authority to determine how best to restore these ponds. And similar to Palo Alto, we will not acquire this land, but the parties will enter into a 50-year agreement with the U.S. Forest Service to construct an engineered levee, restore R1 and R2, and for long-term operations and maintenance. We will adaptively manage and monitor the project. Next slide. So what types of flood protection are we looking at? There are 5 types of protection that we're planning to design. A traditional levee, like the levees that we built on San Francisco Creek, the Safer Bay levees will be very similar in height to what we built. And it is easy to see this by the O'Connor pump station. We are looking at a bit broader slopes on the bay side, as this will be important for healthy tidal marsh shoreline, as well as for the adaptive capacity. Levees in of themselves have a greater adaptive capacity in the event that seas rise faster than current projections. You can add more soil to the top. It's harder to do with flood walls, but we know that where there are space constraints, we will need to build them. Ecotone levees are broad, flat, horizontal, also known as horizontal levees and transition zones. The broad slope provides both flood and habitat resiliency. The bottom picture shows a hybrid flood wall with a transition zone on the bay side. The hybrid is more expensive, but it is critical for a functional tidal marsh. Next slide. So this is the type of flood protection that we select is going to depend on a whole bunch of site-specific constraints. Of course, we'll need to meet geotechnical and engineering requirements. In addition, there's other important considerations such as locations near homes and schools, location near high-functioning marsh. This top picture shows sensitive habitat species. And just because we don't see any of the yellow dots on the north, that's just because we did not look there. This was done in 2022 as part of our O&M for our project. And as well as the bottom picture is showing some constraints, the contamination in the area. And then this part, there's a PG&E substation, Cooley Landing, where it's just a pinch point where we know that we will have to install a flood wall. So then, next slide. So that whatever our project does, we need to keep these in mind. Restore and improve the marsh for natural flood protection, upgrade trails, and coordinate with all stakeholders. That's you and other projects along the shoreline. We want to be sure that what we do does not have unintended consequences for the Bay Area. And the next slide. And the next few slides are the conceptual cross sections that are presented in the.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind slowing down just a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Sure. So the next few slides are the conceptual cross sections that were presented in the NOP document. They are not designs, but concepts to help visualize the possibilities. I am going to describe these going from the Bedwell Bayfront Park to the southern boundary of East Palo Alto. And the little orange hatch marks on this map are where these conceptual designs were developed. So next slide. At Bedwell Bayfront Park, we will need to raise the levee and design it to FEMA standards. We will increase the transition zone in the area, and the details of this to be determined in consultation with our partners at the Refuge and Salt Ponds Restoration Authority. Next slide. This slide shows 2 options for the Facebook/Meta campus area. These options include the flood wall hybrid transition zone option, as well as a traditional levee, similar to what we built for our completed creek project. Next slide. So potential options for the Ravenswood substation will likely include an ecotone transition zone and an engineered levee. The Dumbarton Approach on the right, I think we're at a wrong slide. We want to get back up one slide, Kevin. There. So the Dumbarton Approach on the right shows an example loop road going through ponds SF2. There are both engineering and environmental constraints, but we will evaluate this at a program level in the EIR. We know how important the loop road is to the residents of East Palo Alto, and we will evaluate this as well as options on either side of this, where we show 3 different options for the Dumbarton Approach area. Next slide. The next slide is the North of Bay Road in East Palo Alto.
Tess, we're actually pausing to let translation catch up for a minute.
Okay, so I really will slow down a bit.
Okay, just a second.
Take a deep breath after every sentence.
Okay.
Kevin,
Yes.
can you try down at the bottom of the PowerPoint to enlarge? You see
Yeah,
the 70?
I've been playing with it. Thank you. I
Okay,
do
great.
see the
Thank you.
suggestion in the Q&A. It's a good one. I was able to enlarge it a little bit, but not 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Getting better as we figure this out.
Okay.
Okay, Tess, I think we're ready to go.
Okay. So for the area north of Bay Road shows just a single concept right now, but we recognize that we will likely employ multiple options along this region. And that's really all I wanted to say about the north of Bay right now, because it's very complicated. And the next slide, please. Similar to the area in south of Bay Road, we're showing 2 potential options. Other options are possible. And as I mentioned in there, we may vary these options as we move up and down the flood protection feature. So next slide. So what does our schedule look like? We completed base mapping in 2020, and environmental and historic preservation review by FEMA is complete. So our next work will be implementing a geotechnical investigation within our allotted work windows, which would be between September 15th and January 31st, the end of this year to the beginning of next year. And we will also do something that's not part of the required CEQA, but we want to do it. We will be developing, after we get our design progressed enough to about 30%, we will have a draft project description that will be released for public review in August. And then, early 2024, the draft environmental impact report is expected. But throughout this entire area, we still will be engaging with all of you. So now that I've talked about the purpose and need for SAFER, I'd like to turn it over to Violet Saina of Climate Resilient Communities to talk more about our sustained public outreach for this project.
Thank you, Tess. Good evening, community and stakeholders. I am very honored to be here to share our goals and strategy to ensure an inclusive process for the Safer Bay project. I also want to share that we have been engaged with the development of this project through past community engagement processes from its inception phase to up to today, and looking forward to engaging our community and you all here today with future outreach engagement process. We are excited to continue this service to the project and especially to our communities in East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. The sole purpose of our involvement is to engage residents and stakeholders who are active in the planning process to solicit input from the community to ensure proposed measures that Tess just shared with you all that are feasible, equitable, and effective. It's important to share that San Francisco Joint Power Authority also adopted the Bay Adapt Joint Platform and principles to guide this project. The Bay Adapt is a strategy with actions and tasks necessary to protect people and built environment from rising sea level. It includes supporting socially vulnerable communities, putting nature first whenever possible, supporting existing efforts, but planning for the long term, and practicing inclusive, community-led governance and decision-making. In partnerships with community organizations, such as Climate Resilient Communities and Nusta Casa, we have set specific goals for our engagement plan. First is to raise awareness. Stakeholders must be aware of the Safer Bay project and the CEQA and NEPA process. Second, education, to understand the need for the project. Third, gather input. We need community stakeholders' perspectives and lived experiences to help the planning team verify or expand our unavailable information. And fourth, decision-making, encourage and provide opportunities for stakeholders to engage in the decision-making process. Next slide, please, Kevin. So Climate Resilient Communities, we are a community-based organization dedicated to serving communities of East Palo Alto, North Fair Oaks, Belhaven of Menlo Park. We also have projects in Redwood City. We serve our communities through 3 core programs: community-based adaptation, climate action education, and resilient homes. Under our community-based adaptation program, we serve our communities through our climate change community teams. We have a team in East Palo Alto. We have a climate change community team in Belhaven of Menlo Park, and also a North Fair Oaks climate ready team. And through this team, we work together with community leaders, faith-based leaders, our youth, and our other community-based organizations in partnership to create programs to address the need or to address capacity building needs that will allow our communities to plan and prepare for climate change. Our next slide, please. As I have alluded to, for the Safer Bay project, we are engaged to support the community outreach and engagement together with Nusta Casa. A significant step is forming an advisory group, and the advisory group will help guide the implementation of the project and ensure that local community has direct input to create the project that they want to have built. Also, we want to make sure that we engage the community in a meaningful way that establishes trust and builds long-term relationships, which is imperative for the community served by this project. Climate Resilient Communities, or CRC, will also engage and seek guidance from our climate change community teams in Belhaven and East Palo Alto, which is another existing structure to ensure that community leadership is engaged with this project. Partnership with other community-based organizations, and we will meet the community where they are and uphold our values to engage in a meaningful way where culture and justice, when culture and language justice is practiced. These are some of the existing community engagement opportunities that we plan to engage, but as I mentioned before, once the advisory group, which I hope some of you who are here from the community who are attending and listening to this webinar, if you are interested in serving the community and be part of the project, please reach out to us, because once we have the advisory group in place, a lot of the engagement plan will be much more clearer, so that we can be present in the communities, so that communities can easily access information about this project moving forward. I will now pass on to Victoria from Nusta Casa to share their plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet. Thank you so much. And I finished my slide is the other one, the next one. You can pass the next. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for including me in this important community meeting. My name is Vikki Avila Medrano, and I'm the program director of Nusta Casa. Nusta Casa organization is based in East Palo Alto, and over the last 20 years, we've served the underrepresented community in the Mid-Peninsula. We exist to uplift the voices of the Latino community and envision a future where everyone thrives despite socioeconomic status. The environmental justice work has been part of the Nusta Casa organization for 4 years. We run an environmental justice parent academy that is designed to build environmental leaders at the local level. The parent academy incorporates the 3 major ethnic groups in East Palo Alto, which are the Latino, African American, and Pacific Islander communities. We also work with local facilitators, such as Violet. Some of the challenges that we discuss at the local level include sea level rise and flooding. Next slide, please. Nusta Casa was involved in the community engagement component of the adoption roadmap and lead bilingual community forums. The objective was to center the voices of the communities we represent. We also provide recommendation on effective community engagement best practices. You can see these recommendations that we do, what we did in our Nusta Casa webpage, such as co-design process and developing accessible engagement activities. At this time, Nusta Casa is looking forward to engaging the community in this important project. Some strategies we've used in the past include focus groups, community webinars, and stakeholders interviews. Nusta Casa will adopt the strategies based on the community's needs. Nusta Casa will leverage our outreach effort with Violet at CRC, and we look forward to being part of the advisor group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And thank you, Jill, Tess, and Violet as well. Next, we will launch 2 more quick polls. These will help us in our community outreach in the future. Let me get the poll launched. Just a moment. Poll number 2. Launching. This is a quick question for our attendees. How did you learn about this meeting? Please let us know how you learned about this webinar. We'll give people a few more seconds to answer the poll. I see a few more answers coming in, not too many. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I'm ending the poll. And here are the results. Most of you learned about this event from your friends, neighbors, or colleagues. So that's helpful feedback for us about how people share information in our community. We have one more poll. Really quickly here. For you, what outreach events have worked for you and your community? Please let us know. Okay, a few more people may be voting, but close it down in just a few. 3, 2, 1. I'm ending the poll now. And here are the results. Public presentations seem to be a pretty good way to reach people, followed by workshops, focus groups, and study tours. Thank you so much for sharing your opinions. Those would be really helpful for us. We appreciate your input. Now, we have come to the point where we're going to focus on the attendees, your comments and your questions. My colleagues will read the questions, so will I, and your comments that have been posted in the Q&A. If there are a lot of similar questions, we may combine them and paraphrase them for brevity. But we do want to make sure we engage in a lively discussion and we bring forward the issues that you care about and that you would like to see answered. So I want to begin with an important question that I saw posted. I'd like to have my colleagues Kevin and Tess weigh in on this as well. Someone asked the question, so will this project enable us to get out of our insurance requirements? And that is a very, very important motivation for this project. It is the ultimate end goal of this work. As you've seen in the maps, there are many different segments of this project. They will all need to be completed to have everyone who is in the flood zones in the FEMA flood map removed from insurance requirements. And that's going to take a long time. So now I'd like to have Tess and Kevin describe a little bit about what the process is for having the project area removed from FEMA's insurance requirements.
Sure, I can take this one. So the process is that we have to have the project constructed. We have to have everything in place, our O&M manual, our easements, and then we will
Test, slow down. Okay. O&M means operations and maintenance. It's how we're going to take care of everything once all the construction is complete.
Mm-hmm. And then we can submit a package. It's called a letter of map revision, and it's a request to FEMA. And then with that letter, and they will revise the flood insurance maps if they approve it. But we're designing the project to FEMA standards, so we believe that we will be able to get this approved. And the process will take several years, is my experience with the city of Carpinteria. So that's all. Kevin, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I would say the answer to the question is yes. It will help for sure. Full removal of all parcels from the floodplain is a long road, but it's something that the project is striving to do. However, there's sometimes, in some cases, is what's called residual risk, meaning that some properties may be at risk from flooding from another source. And so not everybody will simultaneously be removed from the floodplain with this project. Some people will require other actions for removal.
Okay, thank you both. Kevin, there was a question posed by one of our guests that you said you would like to answer the question. And the question was, it seems that the marsh located east of Highway 84 and north of University has not revegetated very well. Is there a new way to recreate the marsh habitat?
Yeah, and I actually asked to answer this question because there's a very large swath of land that the question asker could be referring to. In general, that area is part of the South Bay salt ponds. Part of that area will become part of this project, and there will be a program to revegetate and restore portions of that property by this project. But a lot of that property north of University and east of 84, there are various alternatives that other agencies, in cooperation with ours and many others, are looking at for long-term maintenance and habitat restoration. And that's part of the South Bay Salt Ponds Restoration Project. And I would invite the question asker to contact us directly, because we can give a lot more specific information if we can dial in on the portion of the marsh that's being focused on.
Great, thank you, Kevin. There are several questions posed by someone from the City of East Palo Alto's Engineering Division, and these are really important questions. So let's take them one by one. Since the new Bay Road construction, I'm wondering what type of wear, if any, that might have in terms of construction traffic. Kevin, if you want to take that one, that would be great.
I'll start that one, and then I might ask Jill to tag on with regards to how we analyze the impacts of construction traffic. With a project like this, there will be lots of trucks bringing in soil and other materials to rebuild levees and some fill for restoration. With any project, the contractor is required to keep a neat and tidy workspace. And then also the project is required to replace in kind whatever surfaces or whatever the conditions of the roads in the general environment are after the project is completed. And since this is from the engineering division, I know we're going to work very closely with them on planning for all of the construction and for all the construction impact mitigation. Jill, would you like to say anything about how we analyze traffic in CEQA?
Sure. I'll start by saying that I know that the design team will prioritize those roadways that are designed to handle more traffic in terms of the construction haul routes. Those are referred to as arterial roadways and, of course, freeways. Those roads are designed to handle more traffic. The EIR will certainly consider wear and tear on roadways, especially those that are not designed to handle this level, since I know you'd like to see that addressed in the EIR. There are different ways to do that, and I would, if you have particular thoughts, we'd certainly welcome your comments on that. That might be something better submitted in writing to get into the details of that.
Okay. There are a couple of questions about levee maintenance and in particular around vegetation growth. Tess, do you want to take that, or Kevin?
Sure. The City of East Palo Alto has accepted maintenance responsibilities for the long term for the levees in East Palo Alto. So that would go to the East Palo Alto group, just the same as in Menlo Park. But the real answer is more complicated because, on some of the lands on U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they do not want to be responsible for maintaining an engineered levee. So we will have this agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service so that, and more parties to that would be signatories. So that's the short answer to levee maintenance.
I think I'll add, that's safety test, for levee maintenance, that's all good. I think for vegetation maintenance, I did see a question specific to that. And I'd say that we will be required under the project construction permits to monitor and maintain any vegetation that is part of our ecological restoration and mitigation program. And there will be a set amount of time, usually it's 10 years of monitoring to ensure the success of those plantings, because those plantings are critical to the habitat that we've restored, either as part of the restoration portion of the project or as part of our mitigation for construction impacts, and demonstrate the success criteria that are placed on the project by the regulatory agencies.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'd like to read and answer a question. Will the EIR include concerns about light pollution from new buildings? And I'm sure my colleagues can chime in here as well, but because we are not creating new buildings in the sense of occupied space, we're creating levees and flood walls and transition zones. The light pollution that might be created in the construction process will certainly be something we need to take into consideration. But this project is not building new development in the city, new homes, new offices, or anything else. So our EIR will not address the light pollution from new buildings. It will address potential light pollution from our construction activities. For example, if there's ever a need to have like security lights around a staging area. Otherwise, they're two separate issues, and maybe someone else would like to chime in and add to that.
The only thing I would add is that there's been increased, if there is going to be nighttime construction, which is something that I don't think has been determined yet, then the EIR would consider the effects of light, not only on people, but on wildlife. That's something that certainly the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge would be interested in. So we'll address that.
One of the attendees has asked an important question. What is the sequence of projects? Tess, do you want to take that? You need to unmute.
The project sequence would be the areas in East Palo Alto and the restoration of former salt ponds R1 and R2 would likely be constructed first. This is to get the restoration going quickly, as well as provide flood protection for the Weeks and Gardens neighborhoods.
Okay. There are a number of questions about the loop road. Does your work on the loop road interact with other public consultation and decision-making on whether and how to build this? And there were sort of similar questions about its size, capacity, emergency access, ingress, but Tess, why don't we take a moment to talk about the concept of the loop road?
So if we bring up the figure showing the three options, I think it'll be the easiest way to talk about it. So it's slide, I think you've missed it.
The map with all the dashed lines.
Yeah, the dashed lines.
Not that one.
It's further down.
9, no.
It is
22.
Slide 22. Yeah, we're coming to the right. Yeah, so in this particular area, you can see there's 3 potential alignments in this reach that we call the Dumbarton Reach. And the one that we've been looking at initially, we don't know which way it will go, but would be there's an existing berm through these two ponds, and they are owned by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they are part of the phase 1 restoration of the salt ponds. And so there are a lot of environmental considerations in this area, as well as geotechnical, because it's young bay mud and getting any kind of a road. And in our initial concepts about it, in talking to just a few people, it was envisioned as a 2-lane road, and really not more than that. So you can see in our NOP that cross section just shows a 2-lane road, and I think we put bicycle lanes on either side of that road. And other alignments would be bayward of that, where it's shown next to some potential Marsh restoration, as well as connecting directly to University and possibly having some alternatives at University that might be widened or otherwise alleviate the local traffic congestion in East Palo Alto.
Great, thank you. There's a good question about construction seasons, and I'm sure this is going to come into play. In the previous project, there were very limited months of the year in which construction could occur because breeding cycles of various endangered animals and birds. What are the construction months that are possible for this area?
So it is a restricted construction season, but it's a little bit different than the previous project, but it's for similar for the Ridgeways rail. What we don't have, well, I'm not sure about this part of it, because the other part would be the fish restrictions, but we will have to adhere to our special status work windows with a very limited construction season inside the Marsh and Channel.
So in relation to that, there are a couple of questions about whether or not our EIR will address wildlife, threatened species, birds, and is there any way about this project that would help those threatened and endangered species?
Well, we'd like to think so in the long term, but definitely in the short term, there's always construction impacts. And during construction, it's going to be difficult for everyone, I'm sorry to say, but you get through that, and then you have your long-term protection, which is what the ultimate goal of this project is.
And I'd like to add to that, thank you, Tess, that in the upper portion of the slide that people can be viewing right now, we have those ponds that are labeled R1 and R2 for Ravenswood 1 and 2. Those previous salt ponds are going to be restored to marsh. We're working in close coordination with the Don Edwards Refuge and the South Bay Salt Ponds team. There is no defined project or defined exact configuration of which part of that is going to be tidal pond, which is that going to be returned completely to tides, and what is going to be what are called managed ponds, so that they have a diverse spectrum of habitats. But we're working closely with them. Those restored habitats represent more than 600 acres of improved habitat for those endangered species. So in the long run, as Tess said, we hope that the long-term benefits of the project outweigh the short-term impacts, not only for wildlife, but for people too. There are a couple of other questions. Let's see. There was a question about what the federal government thinks, and I'm assuming this means the Don Edwards Wildlife folks, about the levee alignments that Tess was just pointing out to through what's called the SF2 area. Maybe Tess, you could go into a little bit more about our coordination with the federal agencies.
Sure. So we've been meeting with the refuge who owns the land, as well as the Salt Pond Restoration Authority. and they understand that this is an alternative that will be analyzed, and we are working with them. And that's all I can say about it. It is not, you know, it's not their ideal solution, but they're willing to work with us to evaluate it and see what the best path is for everybody.
And I'll add to that, the original alignments for the area around Pond SF2 where there were two. There was one that was outboard of SF2, so along the existing levee alignment between SF2 and the bay, and then one that cuts behind SF2. It was actually the Fish and Wildlife Service who asked us to at least look at this kind of bisecting levee, because there's the idea, no decisions have been made yet, but there's an idea that someday future managers may decide to restore the outer part of SF2 to active tidal marsh and not manage it as open water, which they're doing now. So it's not anything that we know or think will happen, but we've been asked to at least consider it as an alternative.
Thank you. One of our attendees has commented and asked questions regarding the impacts to their quality of life and health related to the traffic and construction of this project. I would just say, and I'm hoping that Kevin and Tess can both chime in on this, that as this project is, as we think about what's necessary to construct the project, how much traffic, where it's going to go, when it's going to happen, that we are in careful coordination with the community so that we structure that traffic, we choose routes, and we encourage contractors to have appropriately clean vehicles so that our impacts to community health are as minimized as possible. We know East Palo Alto is already significantly impacted by cut-through traffic, and with freeway traffic and cut-through traffic, the air pollution impacts are not insignificant. Construction will bring additional emissions and additional traffic for a short period of time, and we need to be very conscientious about what that will be and how we can minimize it.
I would just add to that, Margaret, that the EIR will certainly consider the potential adverse effects of air pollutant emissions from construction vehicles and conduct detailed evaluations of that and identify measures to mitigate that. Typical mitigation measures that you would see are requiring the contractor to only use construction vehicles that are what are called Tier 4 standards. It's a class of engines that produce less pollution, basically.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions about trails and how they are, how we are going to ensure that impacts to and access to trails are handled during the project. Tess, do you want to take that on?
Sure. So in the previous project, we had held public meetings and we did not get a large attendance. And then we actually went around and posted things on doors, and then we shut the trail down. And it was actually a lot of bikers that might not have been in the immediate neighborhood that that actually, I think we had a whole meeting on that had 50 bikers in the meeting when we shut down the Friendship Bridge during construction. So I think our answer to that is we're engaging 2 local groups, and we are also chatting with the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition and doing a lot more outreach than we did previously so that folks are aware. And then of course, when the project starts, there will be alternative routes for trails. But you know, I know that during the Foster City construction, it was the #1 complaint, and especially for them, it was smack in the middle of the pandemic, and That project took away all their trails when that was their respite from being inside their homes. So I'm saying it will not be pleasant during construction, but we believe that the long-term benefits to the residents of East Palo Alto and Menlo Park will outweigh the short-term adverse, temporary effects.
There are a couple of questions that, although on different topics, all point to issues about or ideas and suggestions about community engagement, communications, and coordination. So one of our top priorities for this project is to ensure that we do a very good job staying in touch with the people in the community who are going to both benefit from this project and have, no doubt, good ideas about what issues we should consider and what it should look like at the end, and who are also going to be impacted on the short term by its construction. So with regard to being involved in the project, before, during, and after, we want to make sure that people who are interested, either in volunteering to be a part of the community advisory group or in any other part of the project that involves volunteer activities, have a channel to do so, because community involvement makes a sense of pride in place, and we strive for that. Yeah. We also hope that being involved, that the community will also be aware of things, as Tess mentioned, when trails need to be shut down for construction activities, or when traffic may need to be rerouted temporarily while large pieces of equipment or materials are coming and going. So being engaged with the community, keeping our channels of communication open, and listening carefully to the community about their particular concerns, we hope to be as effective as possible, not surprising anyone and including everyone's input. Pretty sure we won't be able to please everyone all the time, but we will do our best to minimize the impacts. I'm looking through the questions, and I think that is kind of the end of the questions, mostly. Actually, interestingly, I saw a question from Mr. Halsing, and his question seems to have disappeared.
Somebody may have given him a written response.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned to any of the folks from Public Works at the cities who might be here right now for this meeting, we will be forming a project management team at some point during project development, where a lot of these issues around traffic and traffic impacts will be worked out in partnership with you all and the folks who manage the roads and the trees and all of that.
Mm-hmm. And the only thing I might add to that is we're focusing on East Palo Alto only because it's part of this initial construction area. But very definitely, City of Menlo Park is very engaged. We have weekly meetings with that project management team already, and we will do the exact same outreach for the Bellhaven and Haven Apartments neighborhoods.
So we will also be compiling the questions and the answers to questions during our public comment period. So after June 15th, all of your comments, your suggestions, and your questions will be compiled and responded to. That information will be on our website. We'll also be creating a simple, probably shorter, frequently asked questions document that we'll also share on our website and post in other networks. So I encourage anyone to ask any last questions or pose any last comments about issues that you think we should be particularly attentive to.
I did see one question that I think was answered by one of the project team members about whether or not we would provide copies of these maps. So whomever answered that question, would you share? Probably the rest of the group would probably like to know that too.
Yes. This presentation, all of these slides, including the cross-section drawings, will be posted after this event on our website. The recording of this event will be posted on the website as well. So give us a couple of days to get all of that put together and posted, but it won't be long, and you can come back and refer to it.
And I just wanted to point out that the cross-sections and the NOP itself are already up on our website, and the cross-sections are within the NOP that's available, and you can download it or take a look at it. There's also a hard copy, excuse me, in the Belhaven Library.
And the Menlo Park Library.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, I think if we don't have any further questions or comments, I would like to wrap with a very sincere thank you to everyone. You can find information about the project on our website under the project tab. And you can find information there on the project tab. As Tess said, the notice of preparation document itself is there. Comment period extends through the end of the day on June 15th. You can reach us at our website. You can reach Tess Byler and submit your comments there to her at her email address, tbyler@sfcjpa.org. She'll be compiling all questions and comments. If you'd rather post something the old-fashioned way, we happily accept your cards and letters, and you can post that to us by mail. Our address is 2100 Gang Road, Suite 210, Palo Alto, California, 94303. Thank you again, very sincerely, to our speakers, our interpreters, Noemi and Kayla, and to all of you, our community members. That concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you and good night.